What can you tell us about the meeting?
David, thanks for having me. It was a healthy conversation. There weren't 24 of us. There were probably about 8 AGs, bipartisan group. It was an open conversation, healthy conversation, mostly focused on the issue of privacy and how with the tech sector now, we address the issues of privacy. Some conversation as well about antitrust and how all that fits in.
There were 24 invited, at least according to Bloomberg reports. So 8 showed up, is that right?
We had, I think, 8 present and 2 or 3 more joined by phone. And we had also representatives from other AGs that were in the room as well.
So from what we've seen so far, including from this draft draft executive order, there are 2 areas of concern. One is what we call competition or antitrust law, too much concentration, too little competition. And the other is actually bias in communication. Were both of those discussed, and how much conversation was there had about each?
David, the conversation really focused on the issue of competition and the whole issue of antitrust and privacy, and a great deal of conversation about privacy. Many states, I believe, are interested in trying to make sure that our consumers are as protected as possible when it comes to their personal information. We've seen what happens when some of this personal information gets out there in public sphere, and we want to make sure we can keep that information for that person private. And so a lot of conversation about privacy and how that all intertwines with the whole discussion of antitrust.
So along that line, as I understand, there's something called the California Consumer Privacy Act that, as I understand it, was enacted. You've had some concerns about it, not so much, I guess, with the law, but whether you have the resources to really enforce it.
Right, the implementation. California is the first state to take this step to try to really protect consumer privacy when it comes to the internet space. And we're trying to move as best we can to understand what privacy interests are and to protect it as best we can. We're in the stage now where we get to bring out some regulations, let the industry know how we're going to make it work, and working with the industry and with the consumers, try to come up with a law that helps make sure that we're all protected when it comes to use of the internet.
You're in a particularly special position, being out there in California, the home of Silicon Valley. So you've got a fair number of the companies that would be really subject to any sort of federal regulation, or for that matter, state regulation. How do you strike that balance? Are you finding resistance from the Silicon Valley companies saying, please, please don't really put too burdensome a level on our regulation?
I think the tech sector, generally speaking, for this country has been such a boom. Certainly for California, where it represents probably close to $400 billion in economic capacity for us. It's a major industry, obviously, and it's a forward-looking kind of industry where we're heading. And so most of us believe that we have to do what we can to help this industry thrive. At the same time, we want to make sure they do it the right way and within the structures of the laws that we have in place. And so it's going to be one of those things where everyone should be at the table, whether it's the enforcers and the policymakers to the stakeholders. Everyone should have a seat at the table as we discuss where we move forward to make sure we're making every use we can of technology in the right way and making sure the wrong way is not made available to folks to ultimately undermine the rights of people, principally their privacy rights.
Mr. Attorney General, it's clear the President of the United States believes there's a problem here, and it's somewhere between antitrust and consumer protection and privacy, that something needs to be done about it. Do we have the laws in place to address the concerns that he's had? And if we do, are they federal laws or state laws?
Well, if you start to talk about the whole issue of social media bias, then I think that's a different conversation altogether, outside the structures of our laws. And it's a conversation that maybe the president is having. But our conversation today focused on legitimate issues dealing with the law, antitrust, privacy. That's where we focused.
And so, given existing antitrust laws, state and federal antitrust laws, are there concerns that your office has that some players may be too big, or there may even be some agreements that would be restrictive?
That's all part of the conversation. Where do we go? And this is an industry that, a generation ago was just barely getting off its feet. We were trying to see it walk and crawl. And now we've seen it just really explode. So it's an issue now figuring out how we move forward. Before, we just wanted to see if it could walk. Today, it's running marathons. And so we have to make sure that we are now dealing with the times that we have. But we don't want to destroy the opportunity to have continued success. Obviously, it's generated great economic capacity, lots of good-paying jobs. And what we want to try to do is incent the sector to continue to do what's made us a very powerful economy, ultimately within the confines of the law.
So, Mr. Attorney General, the president is basically in preparing to order his agencies to investigate whether there's some violation of law here at the federal level. Does your office have any significant enforcement investigations going on with respect to social media right now in the state of California?
But we have a number of activities going on. We don't talk publicly about our investigations, but we certainly are making sure that we're protecting the rights of Californians. I don't believe what we're going to see out of the federal government, at least I don't believe DOJ, U.S. DOJ, will move in this direction, is to start to take on issues that don't have to do with the law. The whole issues about bias, social media. Somehow you have to be able to frame it as an investigation that fits within the structures of our laws. And I think most of us would probably agree that when it comes to talking about people's privacy, that's something that we can talk about within the structure of the law. So just whether you talk about bias in the First Amendment, that's something different.
Yeah, just to button this up, your impression from that meeting today was they're not talking about enacting new legislation federally, but whether existing legislation should be applied in a different way.
Well, and all the conversation talked about what agencies, federal agencies, already have the ability to do. The DOJ or the FCC already have the power to look into these things. You don't need an executive order to do that.